And in South America tonight, an environmental problem of a much greater magnitude. The destruction
of the Amazon rainforest.
A worldwide disaster.
Trees are falling at a startling rate.
77,000 square miles of
an area twice the size of Belgium.
The world's coldest continent officially has a new record high temperature. According to the World Meteorological Organization, Antarctica's northern tip reached a verified high of 63.5 degrees Fahrenheit in March 2015. That broke the old record of 59 degrees Fahrenheit. That was set in January of 1974. Antarctica was so warm on that day, it was hotter than some American cities. The high in Denver.
Those parts of the globe which will suffer the most and the soonest are not those parts of the globe which have actually loaded all those carbon dioxides in the atmosphere in the first instance. It's the exact opposite.
But you have to understand this is also a crisis for the world. The fact is that if the poor are suffering today, then the rich will also suffer tomorrow.
Imagine if the Progressive Era never occurred. In case you may not know, the Progressive Era was an intense social and political reform aimed at making progress towards a better society. Environmentalism and climate change were reformed in many kinds of ways over a countless amount of years. Did this era truly help us reduce our current situation of climate change? What exactly was done to lower our exponential climate change? At this rate, are there any things we can do to reduce our current state even more, or are we just too late? This is my project about environmentalism and climate change. Let's go back in time and talk about how the world was before the Progressive Era. In the mid to late 19th century, natural resources were heavily exploited, especially in the West. Land speculators and developers took over large tracts of forests and grazing lands, and mining companies practiced improper and wasteful mining practices as well as the American industrialization. The expansion of railroads into the West and rise of large corporations led to the widespread destruction of areas of plains, as well as increased pollution of land and water. Everything was being destroyed and getting polluted by our actions of expansion. No one really paid attention to our destruction until our former President Theodore Roosevelt, the 23rd president who served in office from 1901 to 1909, representing the Republican Party. Roosevelt had a huge appreciation for the earth and its magnificent, breathtaking wilderness. Theodore Roosevelt himself was seen saying, "There is a delight in the hardy life of open. There are no words that can tell the hidden spirit of the wilderness that can reveal its mystery, its melancholy, and its charm. The nation behaves well if it treats the natural resources as assets which it must turn over to the next generation and not impaired value." Roosevelt didn't just speak of his love for the world, but he showed it as well. Roosevelt used his authority to establish 150 national forests, 51 federal bird reserves, 4 national game preserves, 5 national parks, and 18 national monuments on over 230 million acres of public land. Roosevelt signed the Act for Preservation of American Antiquities. The law gave the president discretion to declare by public proclamation historic landmarks, historic and prehistoric structures, and other objects of historic and scientific interest. He dedicated these sites as national monuments, which makes it much easier to control these relics and preserve them. Not just that, but Theodore Roosevelt was also working with the legislative branch to establish national parks under the Act of Congress. Theodore Roosevelt was all for the world and wanted to do anything he could to regulate and save as much of our nature as he could. Today, the legacy of Theodore Roosevelt is still found across the country. There are 6 national park sites dedicated just for him and his actions. The Roosevelts did not just stop there. This time it was Franklin D. Roosevelt to make a change. The 32nd president on which served in office from 1933 through 1945. Franklin D. Roosevelt established a CCC, which is also known as the Civilian Conservation Corps. During the Great Depression, the Civilian Conservation Corps was a work relief program that employed millions of young men on environmental projects. Many consider it to be one of Roosevelt's most successful New Deal programs. They helped plant more than 3 billion trees and constructed trails and shelters in more than 800 parks nationwide during its 9 years of existence. The CCC helped to shape the modern national and state park systems we enjoy today. Employees fought forest fires, planted trees, cleared and maintained access roads, reseeding grazing lands, and implemented soil erosion controls. Additionally, they built wildlife, fish rearing facilities, water storage basins, and animal shelters. Roosevelt's tree army had planted more than 3.5 billion trees on land that had been barren due to fires, natural erosion, intensive agriculture, or lumbering by the time the CCC program terminated at the start of World War II. In reality, the CCC was responsible for more than half of all reforestation in the country's history, both public and private. Despite all of our actions and efforts made to improve our atmosphere, disaster struck in the infamous 1950 Greenpoint oil spill. A reinforced concrete sewer exploded in the center of Greenpoint, destroying buildings and injuring 3 people, and a major oil spill loomed beneath the neighborhood. The leak remained a mystery until 1978, when the Coast Guard noticed the immense cloud of oil spilling down the Newtons Creek. With an estimated volume of 17 to 30 million gallons, the leak was 50% larger than the historic 1989 Exxon Valdez oil disaster. The oil spill is a toxic climax of 140 years of leaking, rather than a single event. As of March 2017, around 12.9 million gallons of oil and oil products have been recovered, but there is still so much more to be recovered. Environmentalist organizations have claimed that little effort was made until the early 1990s, and that the cleanup activities were rudimentary. The Roosevelt CCC Foundation wasn't the only foundation dedicated to preserving our world, but there was also a group of passionate and committed individuals who sought to secure the funding necessary to protect places and species that were threatened by human development, and they were called the WWF, in other words, the Worldwide Fund for Nature. Inspired by a series of articles by Sir Julian about the destruction of habitat and wildlife in East Africa, Victor Stollen pointed out the urgent need for an international organization to raise funds for conservation. The WWF still stands today. They started in 1961 and is still striving for more. For example, they have approved 5 projects totaling $33,500 in 1961. Mind you, that is over $300,000 in our current day and age. Other projects involved tomorrow's tigers, wildlife conservation in the Amazon, illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, and so many more projects, with the most recent in 2021 being an $80 million expansion of forest conservation project that will help protect and improve the management of 1 million acres of forest around the entire world. Even despite these everlasting movements, we are still not doing enough, and it can be seen in our own country. For example, we can say about our never-ending forest fires happening in California as we speak. After 2 years of drought, the soil moisture is depleted, drying out vegetation. California, like much of the West, gets most of its moisture in the fall and winter. Its vegetation then spends much of the summer slowly drying out because of lack of rainfall and warmer temperatures. Climate change has a huge connection. The warmer our planet gets, the higher our temperatures are, which dry out our lands. All it takes is a single spark to cause destruction and cause millions of dollars in destruction. If we don't switch our ways, California will be in a never-ending battle with wildfires and droughts. There have been environmentalism projects happening right next to us this entire time. For example, the lovely river of Chicago, that you may see boats, kayakers, and filled with green dye during St. Patrick's Day. Yes, the river has gone through its own reconstruction as well. Chicago was in the midst of the great period of growth. As the city grew, more water was needed. This water was brought in from further out in the lake, where the Chicago River emptied into it, bringing diseases such as cholera and typhus into the city. Water cribs were built to house and protect the offshore water for the city to drink, but it wasn't enough to solve the problem, which led to the Chicago River Reversal Project. After a huge rainfall in 1885 carried sewage into Lake Michigan, Chicagoans panicked that another such storm could cause widespread diseases. This fear of diseases helped spur the decision to reverse the river, Construction began on the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal in the fall of 1892. This canal will connect the Chicago and Des Plaines River. The design would allow water to flow downhill and in a new direction. However, at the time of the reversal, no one was thinking about the environmental impact of the waterway. Linking these two separate watersheds created a highway for invasive species. This cost the Great Lakes region $2 billion every year. Despite their downfall, they were able to save the Great Lake, Lake Michigan, from being completely polluted and undrinkable. Our water supply was saved. On the side note, the federal government has proposed an $18 billion project to recreate a separation between the waterways to stop these invasive species. What else can be done to reduce climate change, you may ask? It's easy. It's already happening as we speak. Electric cars. Electric cars have been selling on an exponential rise as seen in the graph, and it looks like this path will not be anytime soon. In fact, in 2019, the lifetime emissions per kilometer of driving a Nissan Leaf EV were about 3 times lower than the average conventional car. Yes, I said that correctly, 3 times lower than the average conventional car. Electric cars aren't the only thing that can be improved, but as well as the shutdown of coal power plants and substitution of creation of renewable resources. As we can see, renewable energy is on a rise and our coal consumption is on a downward slope, as seen in both graphs. In fact, power plants in April plunged 30% from April last year. Coal plants are plummeting gradually, and more recently, wind power became competitive with coal. For wind power, the fuel is free, unlike coal, and doesn't share the same amount of stress and pollutants towards the earth. It is a clean way to produce energy. We should do everything in our ability to change our world for the better. Let's start doing what's right before we realize it's actually way too late to make a change. There are many more ways climate change can be caused, but let's first direct the biggest problem we have been facing for countless amount of years. Let's go green and make the world a better place with one step at a time. This was my project on behalf of the topic of environmentalism and climate change. I hope I was able to share a message showing our progress we made and what else we should be doing in the future. Thank you.